Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
Princess Catherine was not supposed to see him. The briefing room was prepared, senior aides were already waiting, and Prince William was minutes away from beginning a sensitive palace meeting when Catherine noticed a familiar legal figure emerging from a restricted corridor. She stopped. William saw her expression change. Then came the identification that transformed an ordinary royal briefing into a family crisis. The man inside the palace was Queen Camilla's private lawyer. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William had called the closed briefing to settle questions that could no longer be left unresolved. Household responsibilities, future royal duties, access rules, and the growing division of authority among senior members of the family. A palace briefing, in simple terms, is a confidential meeting where senior royals and staff review decisions before they become official action. Catherine had arrived that morning, expecting routine tension. Instead, she had seen a solicitor connected directly to Camilla, leaving rooms normally used for confidential household consultations, and the sight left her shaken. Catherine moved closer to William and told him exactly whom she had recognized. The prince did not argue, hesitate, or ask officials to carry on. He placed his folder flat on the table, looked around the room, and said the meeting was cancelled. Then he dismissed the aides and ordered the room secured until he knew why the lawyer had entered that part of the palace. His anger was controlled, but that restraint made it more serious. Catherine understood the same thing he did. A private disagreement may have crossed into legal territory. William waited until the last aide had gone before asking her to repeat details. Catherine described where the lawyer had appeared, how quickly he had moved, and the moment his expression changed when he realized she had recognized him. The future king listened without interruption. He was no longer asking whether the visit was unusual. He was asking whether someone had deliberately kept it outside his line of sight. A palace staff member then delivered confirmation. The lawyer had entered through a discreet appointment, and his name had never appeared on William's briefing schedule. Worse, the room he had visited was linked to discussions involving future household authority and Catherine's position within the monarchy. William felt the meaning settle heavily. He could no longer treat the encounter as coincidence. Someone had brought Camilla's lawyer inside for a purpose. And as the briefing room emptied, William understood that the stranger Catherine had recognized was only the visible part of a struggle that had already become deeply personal. Behind the closed doors were three people, with very different reasons to fear what came next. Catherine feared that something affecting her future had been discussed without her knowledge. William feared that palace authority was being challenged through private legal channels. Camilla feared something else entirely, that the appearance of her lawyer had exposed preparations never meant to become visible until they were complete. Suddenly, loyalty inside the family carried legal consequences. Catherine sat opposite William after the cancelled briefing, her hands held tightly together as she tried to make sense of what she had witnessed. Her growing position within the monarchy meant that future household structures increasingly touched her directly. A royal household, in plain terms, is the network of staff, duties, offices, and responsibilities surrounding senior members of the family. That made any private discussion about her future more than a personal matter. It could shape how authority would eventually move from one generation to the next. William watched her carefully as she described the encounter again. The princess admitted that what disturbed her most was not simply seeing Camilla's lawyer inside the palace. It was his reaction. He had looked startled when he realized she recognized him. Catherine told the prince that, for one uncomfortable second, she felt less like a member of the family and more like someone whose future was being negotiated elsewhere. He understood immediately why that feeling cut so deeply. William leaned forward and chose his words with care. He told Catherine that legal advice could never be allowed to replace direct conversation between people who still had to live and serve together. The future king was not angry because Camilla had sought counsel. He was angry because secrecy had entered a space where trust was already fragile. Catherine did not ask him to confront the queen consort. She only said she needed to know whether decisions concerning her were already being shaped before she had even been invited into the room. Camilla carried a different fear. She had spent years building a place within royal life, surviving criticism, public resistance, and the long shadow of history. Any suggestion that her responsibilities might gradually shrink, therefore touched something far more personal than protocol. The queen consort did not see every future change as administrative. Some changes felt like warnings that everything she had fought to establish could eventually be handed away. William then received the detail that changed the tone again. A documented palace appointment record showed that Camilla had requested several private administrative consultations during the previous fortnight, yet none had been formally described as legal meetings. One consultation dealt specifically with language surrounding responsibilities assigned to senior royal women during a future transfer of power. Catherine went quiet when she heard that wording. Then she remembered something. Several weeks earlier, one uncomfortable palace conversation had ended with Camilla asking a question no one in the room had properly answered. Catherine now realized that moment might have been the beginning of everything. What had seemed like an unexplained visit now pointed backward, to one conversation that had quietly changed everything. The crisis had not begun that morning. Its true beginning came weeks earlier, during what should have been a routine discussion about future royal duties. Nothing was announced. No voices were raised. Yet one sentence changed the temperature of the room. Catherine was told that certain responsibilities traditionally associated with the sovereign's wife might someday move naturally toward the Princess of Wales. Camilla heard it too, and from that instant, the question stopped being ceremonial. Charles had already encouraged quiet discussions about long-term continuity as parts of his workload were redistributed. The king understood that continuity meant deciding in advance who would carry specific duties when responsibilities shifted between generations. Catherine was expected to take on more work beside William as his own role expanded, and that created an unavoidable overlap with functions Camilla had grown used to exercising. Nobody called it a transfer of power, but everyone understood the possibility sitting beneath the language. Camilla heard the sentence during a private planning conversation, held after a palace reception. An advisor explained that future household patronage coordination and selected ceremonial responsibilities should gradually move toward Catherine as William assumed greater authority. Patronage coordination, in simple terms, meant helping manage royal support for charities, institutions, and public causes linked to senior members of the family. The queen consort became completely still. Then she asked whether the change had already been agreed. Catherine felt the discussion change instantly. She had entered the conversation expecting practical planning, not a confrontation over personal territory. Camilla did not accuse her directly, but the tension was unmistakable. She asked which responsibilities were being discussed, who had approved the recommendation, and whether anyone expected her simply to surrender duties she had spent years building around herself. Catherine answered carefully, making clear that she had never requested those functions. Yet the reassurance did little to soften the moment. Camilla pushed her chair back before finishing her tea. She looked toward the advisor and said that clarity would be required before anything changed. The queen consort then left without another argument, but her silence carried more weight than anger would have. Catherine later told William that she never wanted her advancement to resemble someone else being pushed aside. The prince believed her. What troubled him was how quickly a discussion about service had begun to sound like a dispute over ownership. Within days, Camilla requested formal clarification, over which responsibilities belonged personally to her, which came from her position beside the reigning sovereign, and which could transfer during a future change in power. A documented account of those consultations showed that the same lawyer Catherine later recognized had been asked to examine where royal tradition ended and discretionary authority began. William finally understood why that lawyer had entered the palace. What he still did not understand was why the consultation had been concealed from Catherine and from him. That unanswered question sends William toward the one confrontation everyone inside the palace had hoped to avoid. William does not send an aide. He does not request another memorandum. He walks directly into the private room where Camilla is waiting and asks one question. Why was her lawyer discussing Catherine's future inside the palace without Catherine knowing? For several seconds, Camilla says nothing. Then she answers with a distinction that makes William even angrier. She insists she was not challenging Catherine. She was protecting what she believed could not simply be taken from her. William enters the confrontation, already knowing that Camilla has every right to seek private legal advice. That is not what troubles him. The problem is where that advice crossed into official palace planning. Official household functions are duties tied to royal service rather than personal ownership, and the prince believes that distinction matters because Catherine's future responsibilities were being discussed without her participation. He asks the queen consort why a private lawyer needed access to conversations that could shape another senior royal's position. Camilla refuses to shrink from the question. She tells William that responsibilities gained during Charles's reign cannot simply be treated as temporary possessions waiting to pass automatically to Catherine. The queen consort reminds him that she spent years building credibility inside an institution that once viewed her with suspicion. To her, losing influence is not merely a technical adjustment. It feels like being told that everything she endured was only preparation for someone else to take her place. William's restraint begins to crack. He tells Camilla that secrecy created the very confrontation she now claims she wanted to avoid. The future king makes clear that his anger is not driven by ambition for Catherine. It comes from the possibility that decisions touching his wife were being shaped privately while she remained unaware. Camilla fires back that she has spent years being expected to accept difficult decisions gracefully, and she will not quietly disappear because another generation is moving forward. William remains standing while Camilla stays seated across from him. When she says Catherine's future position does not automatically erase hers, he places both hands firmly on the chair opposite and lowers his voice. This is no longer about titles, he tells her. It is about trust. The queen consort pauses, then finally confirms what he has been trying to establish. Her lawyer had been asked to examine whether several household functions could remain under her personal control, even during a future transition. Camilla then gives him the detail that changes everything again. Charles knew she wanted clarification. The king, she says, was aware that she had concerns about how certain duties might eventually move. But when William asks whether his father specifically approved the lawyer's palace meeting, she does not give him a direct answer. That silence lands harder than the admission. William now understands that the dispute reaches beyond Camilla, Catherine, and one legal advisor. His father may have known more than anyone first realized. William leaves Camilla with one final promise. Before any briefing resumes, he will learn exactly what his father authorized. Everything now depends on Charles, not because he created the disagreement, but because both sides believe his authority can settle it. William wants transparency. Camilla wants reassurance. Catherine wants no victory that humiliates another woman. And the king finds himself facing the most painful version of royal power. The ability to make a decision that may restore order institutionally while damaging someone he loves personally. Charles receives the summary of the cancelled briefing and reads it alone. As sovereign, he holds the decisive authority over how his household is organized. and how responsibilities are distributed during his reign. The sovereign, in simple terms, is the reigning monarch whose authority defines the structure of the royal household. William carries enormous weight as the future king, but he cannot simply redesign his father's arrangements without crossing a line that still matters. Charles reaches the reference to Camilla's lawyer and stops. He removes his glasses, places the pages face down, and says nothing. The silence reveals the conflict more clearly than anger could. The king knows his wife has every right to seek personal advice, and he understands why she wanted reassurance about her future place. But he also knows that once private legal discussions touched Catherine's future responsibilities, the matter changed. What began as protection had created distrust. William waits for his father's answer without softening his position. The prince explains that he is not asking Charles to punish Camilla for consulting a lawyer. He is asking whether Catherine's role was discussed without her knowledge, and whether that discussion had official approval. The monarch understands the distinction immediately. If the answer is yes, William will see it as a breach of trust. If the answer is no, then someone allowed personal concerns to enter palace planning without proper authority. Catherine makes the decision harder by refusing to demand retaliation. She tells William that humiliating Camilla would not repair anything. The princess wants clarity, not revenge, because forcing the queen consort into public defeat could turn an internal disagreement into a permanent family wound. William accepts her reasoning, but he insists that kindness cannot mean allowing the same confusion to happen again. Charles finally gives the answer they have been waiting for. Through a documented account of his private discussion with William, the king confirms that he knew Camilla wanted legal clarification about her own position. He had not, however, authorized anyone to negotiate Catherine's future responsibilities privately. That difference changes everything. Charles orders a written distinction between Camilla's personal arrangements and official royal duties, making clear that one cannot quietly be used to control the other. The decision sounds administrative. Its effect is anything but. By separating personal protection from royal authority, Charles has drawn a line inside his own household, and Camilla is standing on the most painful side of it. The consequences arrive quietly. No dramatic proclamation is issued. Instead, appointments are reviewed, access changes, and conversations once handled informally now require written authorization. For Camilla, that silence is worse than public scandal. The lawyer whose presence triggered the crisis can still advise her privately, but he can no longer move between personal representation and palace business without scrutiny. What Camilla wanted protected has now become more restricted than before. Charles moves quickly once the new boundaries are agreed. Future legal consultations involving personal interests must remain separate from official household planning unless every affected royal is informed. Written authorization, in simple terms, means that a meeting touching official duties can no longer happen through informal access alone. Someone must clearly approve it and record why it is taking place. William's cancelled briefing is rescheduled only after those conditions are in place, because the prince refuses to return to the table while uncertainty still hangs over Catherine's position. Camilla feels the decision personally. She receives the revised access instructions during breakfast, reads the first page, and slowly places it beside a cup she has barely touched. The queen consort asks the aide standing nearby whether William now believes she had deliberately tried to undermine Catherine. The aide hesitates. That pause tells her more than any answer could. She says she understands the decision, thanks the staff member quietly, and asks to be left alone. William carries his own burden. Protecting Catherine has given him the clarity he wanted, but it has also widened the emotional distance between Charles and Camilla. The future king knows his father never wanted to choose between his wife and his son. Yet the crisis forced exactly that kind of choice. Catherine notices the strain in him and reminds the prince that setting boundaries was necessary. Still, neither of them can pretend the cost has been small. Camilla then learns the hardest part. The new rules mean private legal interpretation can no longer be used to preserve official functions beyond the limits Charles intends. Her personal rights remain untouched, but royal responsibilities cannot quietly be converted into permanent personal authority. For the Queen Consort, that distinction feels like a door closing on a future she had hoped to control. Catherine receives a different clarification. Her responsibilities were never legally endangered. The real dispute was whether Camilla could preserve influence over duties that might eventually move toward another generation. That realization brings relief, but not satisfaction. The princess understands that procedure has solved the institutional problem while leaving the human wound completely exposed. Catherine decides that paperwork cannot finish what paperwork began. She tells William she wants to speak to Camilla herself, without advisors, lawyers, or palace officials between them. For the first time since the lawyer was discovered, the conflict moves away from schedules, authority, and legal boundaries, and into a room with only 2 women inside. There are no lawyers in the room, no aides, no briefing papers. Catherine asks to see Camilla alone because she understands something William cannot solve through authority. Humiliation has become the real danger. Camilla expects accusation. Instead, Catherine tells her she never wanted her future to be built on another woman's public defeat. That sentence changes the meeting. For the first time, the struggle is no longer about what either woman might hold, but what each fears losing. Catherine begins carefully, because she wants to separate the personal relationship from the institutional dispute that has consumed the palace. An institutional dispute, in simple terms, is a conflict over official roles, responsibilities, and authority rather than private feelings alone. The princess knows the legal boundaries have already been clarified. What remains is harder. She needs to understand whether Camilla truly saw her as a rival, because no written rule can repair a relationship poisoned by suspicion. Camilla enters expecting demands. She assumes Catherine wants a promise that no future challenge will ever be made, and the Queen Consort prepares herself to defend what dignity she has left. But Catherine does not begin with conditions. She admits that discovering the lawyer frightened her. The secrecy made her wonder whether conversations had been happening for weeks, in which she was treated as a threat rather than family. Camilla listens without interrupting, and for once there is nowhere for either woman to hide behind protocol. Catherine then says the one thing Camilla was not prepared to hear. She never wanted advancement to mean erasure. The princess explains that taking on more responsibility beside William does not require pretending everything the Queen Consort has done suddenly carries no value. That breaks something open. Camilla finally admits that becoming less central frightened her more than she had allowed anyone to see. Camilla lowers her voice and gives Catherine the clearest explanation yet. "I did not want your place. I was afraid of losing mine." The Queen Consort says the legal consultation was driven by that fear, not by a desire to block Catherine's future. She confirms she will withdraw any attempt to interpret official responsibilities as permanently personal to her. The future does not require pretending the past never mattered. She agrees that duties should transition with dignity, recognition, and time, rather than through abrupt removal. Camilla accepts that arrangement because it gives her something legal maneuvering never could: acknowledgement without control. The tension finally begins to loosen, but the palace still has one test left. William must now restart the briefing he cancelled, without making the royal family look divided beyond repair. The women leave the room without victory or defeat, and that becomes the breakthrough William needed. By the next morning, the private confrontation is no longer private. The public does not know every conversation, but it knows enough. William cancelled a palace briefing after Catherine encountered Camilla's lawyer inside a restricted area. The image is irresistible. Future king, future queen, reigning queen, secret legal advisor. Within hours, what began as an internal argument over boundaries becomes a national conversation about succession, loyalty, marriage, and the changing center of royal power. William reacts with frustration as the first headlines begin reducing Catherine's discovery to a battle between two royal women. Palace communications officials face intense pressure to explain why a scheduled briefing was cancelled without exposing private family conversations. A constitutional crisis, in plain language, would mean a dispute threatening the proper functioning of the monarchy or its relationship with government. The official response firmly rejects that interpretation, describing the issue instead as an internal clarification of household procedures. Catherine feels the distortion personally. She had not searched for Camilla's lawyer, challenged the queen consort, or demanded greater authority. She had simply recognized someone where she had not expected to see him. Yet some coverage presents the princess as the force behind a confrontation over future power. William tells aides that this framing cannot stand. The prince knows his wife was the one surprised by the meeting, and he refuses to let her become the convenient villain of a dispute she did not create. Camilla suffers from the opposite version of the same simplification. Headlines suggest she launched a legal campaign against Catherine, even though she has already agreed privately to step back from any attempt to preserve official responsibilities through personal legal interpretation. The queen consort reads one summary in silence and asks why reconciliation always seems less interesting than conflict. She knows the damage has already escaped the palace walls. Outside Buckingham Palace, the story becomes impossible to contain. Tourists and royal watchers gather beneath newspaper boards carrying the stark headline, "Palace Briefing Halted After Lawyer Discovery." Broadcasters repeat the timeline again and again. Catherine sees the lawyer. William cancels the meeting. Palace access rules are reviewed. That single sequence becomes the public symbol of a much deeper struggle. Palace aides make one crucial choice. They do not deny that rules governing private legal advisors have been tightened. That silence effectively confirms that William's intervention produced a genuine institutional change. Then another detail appears. The rescheduled briefing now places Catherine directly inside every discussion touching her future responsibilities. William sees the revised schedule and understands what comes next. Public statements can calm speculation, but only one room can prove whether the family has truly accepted what happened. The palace can survive headlines, but only the next meeting will show whether it survived the wound beneath them. The briefing William cancelled finally begins again, but everything about it has changed. Catherine enters, knowing no conversation about her future will happen without her. Camilla enters knowing legal protection cannot substitute for family trust. Charles enters carrying the weight of a decision that forced him to separate love from authority. And William takes his seat, understanding that canceling the first meeting was never the real act of leadership. The real test is whether he can now bring everyone back together. William opens the meeting without accusation. He tells those present that the earlier briefing failed because trust had disappeared before anyone admitted it was missing. The prince makes clear that the new arrangement is not designed to punish Camilla or reward Catherine. Official royal responsibilities, in simple terms, are duties carried on behalf of the crown, rather than possessions owned permanently by one individual. From now on, private legal interests must remain separate from decisions about those duties, and anyone directly affected must be included before changes are considered. Catherine listens without satisfaction or triumph. The princess now has formal assurance that discussions involving responsibilities expected to pass toward her and William cannot take place around her. Yet she knows the deeper victory is not about gaining influence. It is about refusing to let succession become a private contest. The future king looks toward his wife and understands that she has protected her place, without demanding Camilla lose hers in humiliation. Camilla then accepts the boundary Charles established. The Queen Consort makes clear that she will keep her personal legal counsel, but she will no longer pursue an interpretation that could turn official functions into permanent personal authority. She does not pretend the decision is painless. Still, her agreement ends the central dispute. She keeps dignity, recognition, and the right to be treated with respect, while accepting that royal service cannot become private ownership. Charles waits before speaking. The king looks toward Camilla and says that service to the crown cannot become ownership of the crown. The phrase lands heavily because everyone understands what he means. He has chosen institutional clarity without abandoning his wife. The Queen Consort gives a small nod. Catherine does not celebrate. She simply thanks her, and that restrained response removes the last trace of victory and defeat from the room. William finally understands what canceling the first briefing accomplished. It forced the monarchy to choose transparency over quiet maneuvering. Catherine gained a voice in decisions shaping her future. Camilla confronted her fear of becoming less central without being publicly destroyed. Charles protected the institution while preserving the humanity of the people inside it. What began with Catherine recognizing one unexpected man inside a palace corridor ends with something far larger. A royal family forced to decide that its future could no longer be negotiated in rooms where the people most affected were absent. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.